The last human city burned like a dying star against Earth's scarred surface. Commander Jake Mills pressed his face against the observation deck of the orbital station, watching New Geneva's defensive shields flicker and fail under the relentless bombardment. 27 years of war had led to this moment, humanity's final stand reduced to ash and molten metal. "Sir, we need to evacuate now," Lieutenant Beck urged, her voice cracking through the cum. "The Valen fleet is targeting the station." Jake couldn't look away from the inferno below. 15 million souls had called New Geneva home just this morning. Now purple Valen energy beams carved through the city's towering spires like a butcher's knife through bone. The proud monuments to human achievement, the Great Library, the Unity Spire, the Memorial Gardens, all crumbling under alien fire. "They're not even trying to capture it," Jake whispered, his breath fogging the reinforced glass. "They're just erasing us." The Valen Empire had swept across the galaxy for 3 centuries, subjugating every species they encountered. Most civilizations surrendered after seeing the overwhelming might of their crystalline warships. But humans had fought. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid mining station, they had fought until the very end. And now there was nothing left to fight for. "Commander," Beck's voice turned desperate, "the docking bay is compromised. We have maybe 5 minutes before the station shuddered as Valen fighters strafed the upper levels." Jake finally turned from the window, his weathered face set in grim determination. At 43, he had spent more than half his life at war. His once bright eyes had dulled to steel gray, and his brown hair was streaked with premature silver. "Get to the emergency shuttle," he ordered, grabbing his weapon and tactical gear. "Leave everything else." They ran through corridors filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning electronics. Emergency lights cast everything in hellish red, and the artificial gravity flickered intermittently. Jake's boots pounded against the metal deck plates, each step echoing like a funeral drum. The shuttle bay was chaos. Civilian refugees crowded around the few remaining escape pods, while station personnel tried to maintain order. Jake counted the ship's 3 shuttles, maybe room for 30 people total. Over 200 souls waited for salvation that wouldn't come. "Sir, I can't fit everyone," the pilot reported, his young face pale with the weight of impossible choices. Jake studied the crowd. Families clutched each other, children crying while parents tried to project strength they didn't feel. Scientists and engineers who had dedicated their lives to humanity's survival now faced extinction. These weren't soldiers, they were the last remnants of human civilization. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Sci-fi stellar conflict is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you're hungry for HFY battles and tales of human valor against alien might, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring these front lines to you. "Load the civilians first," Jake commanded. "Families with children, then the elderly." "But sir, what about—" "That's an order, Lieutenant." As the first shuttle launched, Jake watched it disappear into the starfield, carrying precious human lives toward an uncertain future. The second shuttle followed, then the third. The station's superstructure groaned under the assault hull. Breaches venting atmosphere into space. Jake found himself alone in the shuttle bay with Beck and a handful of other officers. The emergency klaxons had fallen silent, even the ship's computer had given up. "There's one more pod," Beck said, pointing to a maintenance craft barely large enough for 2 people. "We could." The deck beneath them buckled as a Valen energy beam punched through the station's core. Artificial gravity failed completely, and they floated in the sudden weightlessness as debris and sparks danced around them. Jake grabbed the pod's controls, his fingers working with practiced efficiency even as his world collapsed around him. The tiny craft shot out of the dying station just as the Valen fleet's flagship delivered the killing blow. The explosion lit up the night side of Earth like a second sun. Jake's escape pod tumbled through the debris field, its hull scarred by metal fragments and radiation. Through the small porthole, he watched the Valen fleet assume orbital positions around his homeworld. Their victory complete. Earth had fallen. New Geneva was gone. The orbital stations were scrap metal drifting in the void. Humanity was extinct, but as Jake's damaged pod limped toward the outer system, its engines failing and life support flickering, he felt something the Valen would. never understand. Something that burned in the core of every human heart, passed down through generations of struggle and triumph, the refusal to surrender. 3 months drifted by in the cold embrace of space. Jake's escape pod had become a tomb of silence, its systems failing one by one like dying organs. The recycled air tasted of metal and despair, and the constant hum of struggling life support had worn grooves in his sanity. He floated in the cramped cockpit, watching distant stars through the cracked porthole, waiting for the inevitable. The emergency rations had run out 12 days ago. Water reserves were down to their last drops. His body had grown gaunt, his uniform hanging loose on his shrinking frame. But his eyes, those steel-gray eyes, still held their fire. Day 93, he whispered into the dead-cum system, continuing a ritual that had become his anchor to sanity. No sign of friendly vessels, no response to distress signals. Hull integrity at 60% and falling. He had tried everything. Jury-rigged repairs with components stripped from non-essential systems. Rerouted power through backup circuits. Extended his supplies by rationing himself to near starvation. But human ingenuity could only stretch so far against the mathematics of survival. The proximity alarm chirped a sound Jake hadn't heard in weeks. His heart hammered as he checked the scanner display. 3 ships, configuration unknown, approaching. On an intercept course, hope flared in his chest until he saw the crystalline hulls gleaming in the starlight. Valen patrol vessels, their purple energy signatures unmistakable. They had found him. Jake's hand moved to the pistol at his side. 1 shot, and he could deny them the satisfaction of capture. But something made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the soldier's instinct to gather intelligence, or maybe just the stubborn, human refusal to quit while breath remained in his lungs. The Valen ships surrounded his pod like predators circling wounded prey. A tractor beam locked onto his craft, and Jake felt the familiar sensation of being pulled against his will. The lead ship's docking bay opened like a hungry mouth, swallowing his tiny vessel dot when the pod's hatch cycled open. Jake found himself staring at his first Valen warriors in person. They stood 7 feet tall, their crystalline exoskeletons reflecting the harsh lighting of their ship. Their faces were insectoid, with compound eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. Human, one of them spoke, its voice like grinding stone. "You are the one called Jake Mills, commander of the dead fleet." Jake straightened, summoning what dignity remained to him. "Commander Mills, Earth Defense Force, service number 7-7-9-4-4-1. The Valen tilted its head, studying him with alien curiosity. "Your species fought well, futilely but well. You will be preserved for study." They bound him with energy shackles and led him through corridors that hurt to look at crystalline. Structures that seemed to bend light in impossible ways. The ship's interior was a maze of geometric patterns that made human eyes water and human minds reel. The prison transport took weeks to reach its destination. During the journey, Jake learned that he wasn't alone. The Valen had collected survivors from across the galaxy, a handful of humans who had escaped the final purge. They were rarities now, specimens to be studied and catalogued. The prison moon of Keth Prime was a desolate world orbiting a dying red giant. The facility itself was carved into the moon's core, its chambers filled with the conquered remnants of a dozen species. Jake was processed like cargo, stripped of his uniform and issued gray prison clothes that marked him as property of the Valen Empire. His cell was a cube of polished stone, 10 feet on each side, with a single energy barrier, serving as both door and window. The walls were covered in scratches and symbols, the desperate marks of countless prisoners who had tried to leave some record of their existence. But it was the human section that truly broke Jake's heart. 40-7 survivors, that's all that remained of a species that had once numbered in the billions. They were kept in adjacent cells, close enough to see each other, but far enough to prevent meaningful contact. The Valen understood the human need for connection and used it as another tool of control. Jake recognized some faces: scientists from the outer colonies, Marines from the Luna base, civilians who had been captured during the early raids. They were broken, most of them. Their eyes held the hollow look of people who had lost everything and found nothing to replace it. But not all of them. Dr. Emma Cross, the xenobiologist who had decoded the first Valen transmissions, still carried herself with quiet dignity. Her red hair had gone white during her imprisonment, but her green eyes blazed with undiminished intelligence. She caught Jake's gaze through the energy barriers and nodded once, a gesture of recognition and respect. Tom Bradley, the engineer who had designed humanity's first hyperspace drives, sat in meditation pose, his dark skin marked with scars from Valen interrogations. His massive frame seemed diminished by captivity, but Jake could see the calculation in his eyes, the mind that never stopped working. Lisa Kane, barely 18 when the war began, had been captured during the siege of Mars Colony. Her youth had been stolen by 5 years of imprisonment, but she moved with the fluid grace of a born survivor. Her blonde hair was cropped short, and her blue eyes held the cold fire of someone who had learned to hate with perfect clarity. And there were others. 47 sparks of humanity, scattered across the galaxy, but somehow still burning. Jake spent his first night in the prison, listening to the sounds of despair that echoed through the corridors. Alien voices crying out in languages he couldn't understand, but the pain was universal. The Valen had conquered everything, enslaved everyone, and now they kept their prizes like trophies in a cosmic museum. But as dawn broke over Kef Prima, pale, red-tinted light that barely illuminated the prison's walls, Jake saw something the Valen had missed. In the way Dr. Cross examined the energy barriers, in the way Tom Bradley tested the strength of his cell's walls, in the way Lisa Kane counted the guard rotations, Jake saw the spark that had carried humanity across the stars. They weren't broken. They were planning. The Valen had made their first mistake. They had underestimated what happened when humans had nothing left to lose. The opportunity came during the Festival of Dominion, when the Valen celebrated another year of galactic conquest. Jake had spent 6 weeks studying the prison's routines, memorizing guard rotations, and mapping the facility's layout through careful observation. The Valen were methodical creatures, following patterns with clockwork precision. It was their strength and their weakness. During the festival, security was reduced to a skeleton crew. The guards who remained were distracted by the celebrations, their attention focused on the ceremonial displays rather than their prisoners. Jake had been waiting for exactly this moment. He had managed to make contact with the other human survivors through a combination of hand signals, coded tapping on cell walls, and whispered conversations during exercise periods. Dr. Cross had been invaluable, using her xenobiology expertise to identify vulnerabilities in the prison systems. Tom Bradley had provided engineering insights, while Lisa Kane had mapped the guard schedules with military precision. The plan was audacious to the point of insanity. Jake began by creating a distraction in the main cell block. Using a technique he'd learned from captured Valen technology manuals, he overloaded the power coupling in his cell's energy barrier. The resulting feedback surge cascaded through the prison's electrical grid, causing a temporary blackout in the human section. In the darkness, Tom Bradley went to work. He had spent weeks secretly loosening the molecular bonds in his cell's stone walls, using a technique that involved repeated temperature fluctuations, breathing on the stone to warm it, then pressing his body against it to cool it. The process was painstaking and barely detectable, but it had weakened the structure enough that he could punch through with his bare hands. Lisa Kane was the first to escape her cell, her small frame allowing her to squeeze through the hole Tom had created. She moved through the ventilation system like a ghost, using skills learned during her years as a resistance fighter on Mars. Her target was the guard post, where she needed to disable the automated systems that monitored the prison. Dr. Cross had discovered something remarkable during her captivity. The Valen energy barriers weren't just containment fields, they were also communication networks, carrying data throughout the facility. By manipulating the frequency resonance of the barriers, she could send false signals to the central computer, creating phantom readings that would mask the prisoner's escape. Jake coordinated the operation from his cell, using a combination of reflection signals and coded sounds to direct the other survivors. They moved with the precision of a military unit, each person knowing their role in the larger plan. The first phase was liberation. Within 20 minutes, all 47 human prisoners were free of their cells. They moved through the facilities, Service corridors, avoiding the main passages where guards might spot them. Jake marveled at how quickly his people had adapted, civilians and soldiers, working together with the seamless cooperation that had once carried humanity to the stars. But escape wasn't enough. Jake had a larger goal in mind: the prison's command center was located in the facility's heart, protected by layers of security and redundant systems. Under normal circumstances, it would have been impossible to breach. But the Valen had made a critical error in their prison design. They had assumed that breaking out was the only goal their prisoners would have. They had never considered that humans might try to take control of the facility itself. Tom Bradley's engineering genius came into play as they reached the command center. The security doors were locked with quantum encryption, but Tom had spent weeks studying the prison's power distribution system. He rerouted energy from the life support systems to create a localized electromagnetic pulse, temporarily disabling the door's security protocols. Lisa Kane led the assault on the command center itself. The 3 Valen guards on duty were caught completely off guard by the sudden appearance of human prisoners. They were warriors, not jailers, and their combat protocols were designed for open warfare, not close-quarters fighting in cramped spaces. Lisa moved like lightning, her prison-honed reflexes allowing her to duck under the first guard's energy weapon and strike at its vulnerable joints. Tom Bradley tackled the second guard, his massive frame overwhelming the surprised Valen. Dr. Cross used her knowledge of Valen physiology to disable the third guard with a precise strike to its sensory cluster. Within minutes, the command center was under human control. Jake took his position at the main console, his fingers dancing over the crystalline interface. The Valen computer systems were alien, but patterns were patterns, and Jake had always been good at finding them. He began accessing the prison's communication array, preparing to broadcast a message that would echo across the galaxy. "This is Commander Jake Mills of the Earth Defense Force." He spoke into the comm system, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had seen the worst and refused to surrender. "To all human survivors, to all resistance cells, to all free peoples of the galaxy humanity lives. The reports of our extinction have been greatly exaggerated." He paused, looking around at the faces of his fellow survivors. They were no longer broken prisoners. They were soldiers again, citizens again, human beings with purpose and hope. "We are taking control of this facility," Jake continued. "We are commandeering Valen vessels. We are returning to the fight. The Valen believe they have conquered us, but they don't understand what it means to be human. They don't understand that we don't know how to quit." Dr. Cross had accessed the prison's database, downloading intelligence on Valen military positions and supply routes. Tom Bradley was working on the hangar bay controls, preparing to launch the Valen patrol ships that were docked at the facility. Lisa Kane was organizing the other survivors, preparing them for the battle that was sure to come. Jake's voice rose as he delivered the final part of his message. "This is not the end of our story. This is the beginning of our rebellion. We are 47 souls against an empire of trillions, but we are human. We are the species that looked at an endless universe and decided to explore it. We are the people who faced impossible odds and found a way to win." The transmission ended, but Jake knew it would be picked up by monitoring stations across the galaxy. The Valen would hear it, and they would know that their greatest victory had been incomplete. But more importantly, any surviving humans would hear it too. They would know that they were not alone in the darkness. State from Kef Prime was a masterpiece of human ingenuity and desperation. Jake's people seized control of 3 Valen patrol vessels, using their newfound knowledge of the enemy's technology to turn their own weapons against them. The prison's defensive systems were neutralized, its guards overwhelmed by the sheer audacity of the human assault. As Jake's commandeered ship lifted off from the prison moon, he looked back at the facility that had been meant to be humanity's tomb. Instead, it had become the birthplace of something new, a rebellion that would spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Valen had thought they understood warfare. They had conquered 1,000 worlds through overwhelming force and superior technology. But they had never faced an enemy that could turn their own strengths against them, that could find opportunity in the darkest. Despair, They had never faced humans who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The transmission from Keth Prime reached the hidden corners of the galaxy like a whispered prayer answered. Jake's message, broadcast on frequencies the Valen monitoring stations couldn't immediately block, sparked something that had been dormant since Earth's fall. In the shadow of gas giants, in the depths of asteroid fields, in the ruins of conquered worlds, humans who had thought themselves the last of their kind suddenly realized they were not alone. The first responses came from the Epsilon cluster, where a group of mining engineers had been hiding in the deep shafts of an abandoned asteroid. Their leader, a woman named Ruthstone, had kept 17 people alive for 4 months by recycling atmosphere and growing fungi in the dark. Her reply was brief but powerful. "We're here. We're ready. Tell us what you need." From the Outer Rim, a former Earth Defense Force captain named Marcus Hill contacted Jake's ship with news that shattered the Valen's carefully constructed narrative. "Commander Mills," his voice crackled through the comm, "you need to know Earth's evacuation was more successful than we thought. The Valen lied about the casualty numbers. There are hidden colonies throughout the galaxy, maybe millions of survivors." Jake felt his heart skip as the implications sank in. The Valen had announced humanity's extinction to prevent exactly this kind of uprising. By convincing the galaxy that humans were finished, they had hoped to crush any remaining resistance. Before it could organize, they had underestimated human stubbornness. Within 2 weeks of the Keth Prime breakout, Jake's small fleet had grown to 12 ships. Some were stolen Valen vessels, others were hidden human craft that had been waiting for a signal to emerge from the shadows. Each ship brought new intelligence, new capabilities, and most importantly, new hope. Dr. Cross had established a mobile laboratory on the flagship, studying captured Valen technology and developing countermeasures. Her breakthrough came when she discovered that the Valen's energy weapons relied on a specific crystalline matrix that could be disrupted by precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulses. "It's their Achilles heel," she explained to Jake during a strategy meeting. "Their technology is more advanced than ours, but it's also more specialized. They can't adapt as quickly as we can." Tom Bradley had been even more successful in his engineering projects. He had reverse-engineered Valen shield generators and hyperspace drives, creating hybrid systems that combined human innovation with alien technology. His masterpiece was a cloaking device that could hide human ships from Valen sensors by mimicking the energy signatures of space debris. Lisa Kane had taken charge of training the growing number of volunteers who wanted to join the rebellion. Many were civilians who had never held a weapon, but they learned quickly under her guidance. She taught them guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run strategies, and most importantly, how to think like humans in a galaxy full of alien minds. The rebellion's first major strike came in the Centauri system, where a Valen supply convoy was transporting captured human technology to the Empire's research facilities. Jake's fleet ambushed the convoy using Tom's cloaking devices, appearing out of nowhere to disable the escort ships. But it wasn't the military victory that mattered most, it was what they found in the cargo holds. The Valen had been studying human creativity and adaptability, trying to understand how a species with inferior technology had managed to fight them for so long. Their research files contained detailed analyses of human psychology, battle tactics, and problem-solving methods. The aliens were clearly baffled by humanity's ability to improvise and adapt under pressure. "They're trying to reverse engineer our unpredictability," Dr. Cross observed as she studied the captured data. "They can't understand why we keep fighting when logic says we should surrender." Jake smiled grimly. "That's because they're thinking like conquerors. They've never had to think like underdogs." The rebellion's tactics evolved rapidly as more cells joined the fight. They struck at supply lines, communication relays, and isolated outposts. They avoided direct confrontation with large Valen forces, instead focusing on targets that would disrupt the Empire's operations without triggering massive retaliation. The Valen response was predictable and methodical. They increased patrols, strengthened security at key facilities, and began hunting for the human fleet with systematic precision. Their commanders issued orders for the complete elimination of all human survivors, finally acknowledging that their earlier reports of extinction had been premature, but the rebellion had already spread beyond their ability to contain. In the Vega system, a group of human scientists had spent months developing a virus that could disrupt Valen computer networks. They released it through captured communication relays, causing chaos in the Empire's data infrastructure. The virus didn't cause permanent damage, but it demonstrated that humans could strike at the heart of Valen civilization. Near the galactic core, a team of former Earth Defense Force Marines had established a base in the ruins of an ancient civilization. They began training other survivor groups in advanced combat techniques, turning refugees into soldiers and scientists into saboteurs. The rebellion's greatest victory came when they discovered that the Valen had been lying about more than just human casualties. The Empire's internal communications revealed that they were facing resistance from multiple species across the galaxy. The humans weren't the only ones who refused to accept defeat. Jake realized that the rebellion had reached a critical moment. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were becoming a symbol of resistance for every conquered species in the galaxy. The Valen Empire, which had seemed invincible, was beginning to show cracks in its perfect facade. The alien commanders had expected humans to behave like every other species they had conquered. They had assumed that superior technology and overwhelming force would be enough to crush human resistance. They had never considered that humans might actually become more dangerous when they were desperate. As Jake's fleet prepared for their next operation, he reflected on how much had changed since the fall of New Geneva. The 47 survivors from Keth Prime had become the nucleus of a growing rebellion that now numbered in the thousands. They had proven that reports of humanity's extinction had been greatly exaggerated. But more than that, they had proven something the Valen would never understand: that the human spirit couldn't be conquered by force alone. Every defeat had taught them something new. Every loss had made them stronger. Every setback had revealed new opportunities. The Valen had thought they were fighting a conventional war against a defeated enemy. Instead, they found themselves facing something far more dangerous, a species that thrived on adversity and grew stronger with each challenge. The rebellion was no longer just about survival. It was about proving that freedom could never be completely extinguished, no matter how dark the galaxy became. The assault on the Valen homeworld began at dawn on the day the Empire celebrated its 1,000th year of dominion. Jake's fleet had grown to over 200 ships, a ragtag collection of human survivors, captured Valen vessels, and craft from a dozen other species that had joined the rebellion. They emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their approach masked by Tom Bradley's latest innovation, a system-wide sensor disruption field that made the rebel fleet appear as nothing more than cosmic background radiation. The Valen homeworld of Vex Prime was a crystalline jewel orbiting twin suns, its surface covered in impossible spires that reached toward the stars. It was the heart of an empire that had conquered half the galaxy, defended by orbital fortresses and energy shields that had never been breached. Jake stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the enemy world grow larger on the viewscreen. He wore the uniform of the Earth Defense Force, carefully preserved since his escape from Keth Prime. The silver stars on his collar caught the light of the twin suns, and his steel-gray eyes held the fire of a man who had seen the worst and refused to surrender. "This is insane," Lisa Kane observed, studying the tactical display. The Valen defensive grid showed thousands of weapon emplacements, shield generators, and patrol ships. "We're outnumbered 100 to 1. "We're not here to win a conventional battle," Jake replied. "We're here to prove a point." The truth was the rebellion had already achieved its primary goal. Over the past months, Jake's broadcast had reached every corner of the galaxy, inspiring resistance movements on 1,000 worlds. The Valen Empire, which had ruled through fear and overwhelming force, was facing uprisings from species that had been conquered decades ago. But Jake understood something that even his own people didn't fully grasp. This wasn't just about military victory, it was about legend. The galaxy needed to see that humans could strike at the heart of the empire that had supposedly exterminated them. They needed to know that some things could never be conquered. Dr. Cross had spent weeks analyzing the Valen homeworld's defenses, looking for weaknesses in their seemingly impregnable systems. Her breakthrough came when she realized that the Valen's greatest strength was also their greatest vulnerability: their rigid hierarchy and absolute reliance on centralized command. Their entire defensive grid is controlled from the central command spire, she explained during the final briefing. If we can disable that single point, their coordination will collapse. They'll have superior firepower, but they won't be able to coordinate their response. Tom Bradley had designed the weapon that would make it possible. Bradley had designed the weapon that would make it possible. A concentrated electromagnetic pulse that could penetrate the command spire's shields and disable its quantum processors. The device was a masterpiece of human engineering, combining captured Valen technology with principles of physics that the aliens had never considered. But delivering the weapon would require someone to penetrate the most heavily defended structure in the galaxy. Jake had known from the beginning that this would be a one-way mission. The plan required a small team to infiltrate the command spire, while the main fleet created a diversion. The chances of survival were essentially zero, but the impact would resonate across the galaxy. "I'm going," Jake announced, and the bridge fell silent. "Sir, you can't," Lisa Kane began. "Yes, I can," Jake interrupted. "This is what we've been building toward. The rebellion doesn't need me anymore. It needs a symbol. It needs proof that humans will never stop fighting, no matter what the odds." The battle began with a coordinated strike on the outer defensive grid. The rebel fleet, led by converted Valen destroyers, engaged the orbital fortresses in a series of hit-and-run attacks. They couldn't match the Empire's firepower, but they could create chaos and confusion. Jake's infiltration team consisted of just 4 people: himself, Dr. Cross, Tom Bradley, and Lisa Kane. They used a captured Valen shuttle to slip through the defensive grid while the main battle raged around them. The shuttle's identification codes, hacked by Dr. Cross, identified them as a priority diplomatic mission. The central command spire rose from the planet's surface like a crystalline mountain, its faceted walls reflecting the light of the twin suns. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a monument to the Empire's power and the billions of lives it had crushed. Landing on the spire's lower levels, Jake's team moved through corridors that seemed to bend reality itself. The Valen architecture was designed to intimidate and disorient, but humans had learned to adapt to alien environments. They navigated by instinct and determination, following Tom's technical schematics toward the central command chamber. The Valen guards they encountered were caught off guard by the sudden appearance of humans in their most sacred space. These weren't the broken prisoners they were used to seeing. These were warriors with purpose, moving with the precision of people who had nothing left to lose. Dr. Cross used her knowledge of Valen physiology to disable the guards with targeted strikes to their sensory clusters. Tom Bradley's engineering expertise allowed him to bypass security systems that should have been impossible to crack. Lisa Kane moved like a ghost, her prison-honed reflexes allowing her to strike before the enemy could react. But it was Jake who carried the weight of the mission. As they climbed toward the command chamber, he felt the expectations of every human who had ever looked at the stars and dreamed of freedom. He carried the hopes of his species and the promise of a future that seemed impossible. The command chamber was a vast sphere of crystalline walls and floating control surfaces. At its center sat the Valen High Command, 5 ancient beings whose minds had directed the Empire's expansion for centuries. They turned their compound eyes toward the intruders, more curious than afraid. "Humans," the eldest spoke, its voice like grinding stone. "You have come far to die in our most sacred space." Jake stepped forward, Tom's device in his hands. "We didn't come here to die. We came here to prove that some things can't be conquered." The electromagnetic pulse that followed was visible from orbit, a brilliant flash that lit up the command spire like a second sun. The Valen defensive grid flickered and died, their coordination shattered by the loss of their central command. The battle that followed became legend throughout the galaxy. Jake's fleet, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with the desperation of people who had seen their homeworld burn. They couldn't defeat the Valen Empire, but they could prove that humanity's spirit remained unbroken. The command spire's collapse sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Valen had been revealed as fallible, their seemingly invincible empire shown to have weaknesses that could be exploited. More importantly, the galaxy had seen humans strike at the heart of their oppressors and emerge victorious. Jake Mills died in the ruins of the command spire, his body broken but his mission complete. His final transmission, broadcast across the galaxy, carried a message that would inspire rebellions for generations to come. This is Commander Jake Mills of the Earth Defense Force. We came from a small blue planet in an unremarkable system. But we carried something that empires can never understand, their refusal to surrender. We may be gone, but we are not forgotten. We may be scattered, but we are not broken. We are human, and we will never stop fighting for freedom. The Nova had ignited. Across the galaxy, conquered species rose up against their oppressors. The Valen Empire, which had seemed eternal, began to crumble under the weight of its own contradictions. Earth's last city had fallen, but one human spark had ignited a rebellion that would burn across the stars. The galaxy would never be the same, and somewhere in the darkness between worlds, the spirit of humanity continued to shine like a beacon of hope. The war was far from over, but the impossible had become inevitable. Freedom, once lost, could be reclaimed by those brave enough to fight for it. And humans, as the galaxy had learned, would never stop fighting.